overplay in your hand?
When I play my hand, you won't see it coming.
Any flammable liquids or firearms?
In the box? Nah.
This situation is not going to be controllable for much longer.
You got a pretty good appetite for someone who was just shot at.
If I stopped eating every time somebody tried to hurt me, I'd be a skeleton. I want to be upfront with you. It could get ugly.
This me, we're in the mafia?
Nah, there's no such a thing.
Is this a one-off? Or one of many?
Too soon to tell.
Hello, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Dave Jorgensen, senior video producer and TikTok guy here at the Post. Today we're talking about the new drama series, Tulsa King. Joining me now is the show's executive producer and writer, Terence Winter. Terence, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm very excited, and I understand that Sylvester Stallone had to schedule because of a conflict, but the good news is I have about 100 questions for you, so we're going to fill that space nicely.
Ready. I'm ready and very excited to talk about the show.
Awesome. Quick note to our audience, we want to hear from you as well. So if you have any questions for Terence, please tweet us using the handle @PostLive. That's @PostLive. Okay, let's get started. So a lot of mob stories are set in New York and New Jersey, as you well know, and Tulsa King does start off there. But very quickly, Sylvester Stallone's character, Dwight Manfredi, is told in the pilot episode, there's nothing left for you here. You're going to Tulsa. So I have to ask you, Terence, why Tulsa?
Well, that was the appeal of the show. You know, the challenge of doing a mob show is trying to find a fresh way in. So, the original incarnation of the pilot, written by Sheridan, had the action in Kansas City. The idea was to try to put the character in a place that had absolutely no connection to the Italian-American mafia. And Kansas City actually had a long and storied history with the Italian-American mob. So I thought, let's try to find a place that's even more obscure. The last place on earth you'd think you'd find a mafioso. And for me, that felt like Oklahoma, and more specifically, Tulsa.
Yeah, so I'm weirdly in a good position to say I think you made a good call, because I grew up in Kansas City, but I also lived in Tulsa for a year. And I feel like Tulsa is the right spot. Had you visited Tulsa before, or what was your relationship to that city?
I hadn't. Tulsa was a mystery to me, much like it is to our character. It was only a place I knew from movies and the map and looking at pictures. So, when I started writing my version of the pilot, I booked a trip to Tulsa, and I ended up spending 3 days there. I lived in the Mayo Hotel, where Dwight lives on the show, and just started wandering around and talking to people. I kind of had the same experience. You may be able to tell I have a New York accent, I'm told. So I was curious to see how people would react to me, but they couldn't have been nicer. It was actually, really lovely. But yeah, just wandered around and soaked it in, and open skies and, blue skies and, horses, and kind of stumbled on, some local attractions. One of the things featured in the second episode is something called the Center of the Universe, which is this acoustical anomaly, this circle of bricks where if you stand inside it and speak out loud, you can't hear yourself. And your voice, or rather, your voice echoes back to you louder than you spoke, which is kind of fun. And I thought, wow, I could maybe use this in the show and work on it. And I ended up employing it. But yeah, it was really I really liked it immediately as soon as I got there.
Yeah, I was really excited when that showed up in the second episode. I kind of thought to myself, I don't know if it's appeared in film or TV before, but I'm really glad it finally is, because it's the perfect device.
Yeah. Happy to put it on the map.
For sure. So I think your accent's kind of New Yorker, but it's not, Sylvester Stallone's East Coast accent.
Right.
But as a New Yorker, Dwight is like a fish out of water in Tulsa, and we have a clip that alludes to that. So let's take a look.
You don't need to put yourself through this thing. I want to be your friend. I want you to be my friend. I don't want to hurt your feet. Just open the safe, please. My God. How much you got there?
$500,000.
This is how it's going to work. I'm going to take 20% a week. Hey, we all got bosses. Even I answer to somebody. But in exchange, I'll protect you from the gangs.
What gangs?
And the law.
This is legal.
And if you get attacked by locusts, I'll spray them. Please, don't make me have to be an asshole about this. Okay? I protect you, and you pay me a commission. Capiche?
That's really all you're gonna take?
What did I just say? We're partners. You make the money and I make sure you keep it. Do we have a deal?
Do I have a choice?
Absolutely not.
I was so glad to see Martin Starr have a pretty prominent role in the show as well. But on top of a new location here, this is right moments after he's arrived in Tulsa. What else is Dwight adjusting to?
Well, he's just gotten out of prison after 25 years too. So he's kind of a guy who just got out of a time capsule. So not only is he in a different place, that place is completely befuddling because there are things in it that he just doesn't even understand. He doesn't know what Uber is. He can't believe coffee costs $5 a cup. Virtual reality. There's no end of things that are making him scratch his head, and he's really trying to adjust and fit in. And he's also completely an alien in this place. So there's a lot of things coming at this guy at the same time. And he's also still required to earn a living, and he's got a very limited skill set in which to do that. He is still a gangster. He's a kinder, gentler gangster than he was 25 years ago, but a gangster nonetheless in a place that has never seen anybody like him.
Yeah, those adjustments there's a lot of kind of comedy, just inserted into some moments. And there's one part where he's trying to get a glass cup at the coffee shop, and they said, well, they appreciate him going green. So there's really funny sort of moments like that where
this really is a dark comedy more than it is a drama. But it's a comedy born of circumstance and the reality of taking people who are very unlike each other and dropping them into a melting pot together. It's not like the traditional sitcom set up a joke and pay it off. It's really more about behavior and taking people who in a million years would never spend time with each other and having them occupy their worlds, and seeing how a guy like Dwight negotiates his way through the day is sort of where the comedy is.
Yeah, and I believe I read in an interview that it was your idea to have him have been in jail for 25 years. Is that a big part of that decision, of just the contrast of 25 years ago in New York to present day in Tulsa?
Yeah, I felt having him in jail for the last 25 years set up an inherent conflict with his mob family, where he gets out expecting fully to be rewarded for his time in prison and the fact that he kept his mouth shut and he adhered to that code of omerta and didn't say anything. And instead, he gets unceremoniously sent by the boss's son, who's now a grown man, to Tulsa, Oklahoma. So he considers this a huge slap in the face and a step backwards, and he's really annoyed, and rightfully so. Not only is he getting rewarded, he's getting banished. But he still has to be a good soldier, and still has to earn, and still has to make his way in the world. So I think the prison element also enabled us to present a guy who spent the last 25 years reading and working out every day. So he's incredibly formidable, and he's really well read and smart and thoughtful, and a much more thinking gangster than he was 25 years earlier. So it just makes for a more interesting, in-depth persona.
Yeah, there's a line, and I'm blanking on it, but I just remember him saying to Martin Starr about, for his edification, he's basically giving him a lesson, and I wish I remembered what. But I love that he's really this informed gangster that's also dropping knowledge on them.
By surprise, you don't expect, quotes, like, I'm happy to be your Rubicon, to come out of that guy's mouth, or he references Arthur Miller in the second episode, A View from the Bridge. And, it's a little jarring at first that you're like, oh, wow, this guy is actually very well read.
Yeah. And you brought a lot to what is really a creative partnership with Taylor Sheridan, who created Yellowstone, Tulsa King, and pretty much everything else that I've seen on Paramount Plus. Can you talk a little bit about how he approached you to basically be the showrunner for this show?
Yeah, I mean, I inherited this, which was my great good fortune. Taylor and I share representatives, and I got a call one day that Taylor had written a pilot literally over the course of a weekend. Originally, it was set in Kansas City. It was originally called Kansas City King, about an aging mobster who gets sent to Kansas City. And Taylor, being Taylor with his 9 other shows going on, couldn't possibly run this. And he said, well, what about Terry Winter? He might be a great choice to take this over. So as soon as I heard Taylor Sheridan and Sylvester Stallone, I said, where do I sign? They said, do you want to read the pilot first? I said, okay, all right, but I'm pretty sure I'm doing this. Read the pilot, thought it was great, real fun, had some ideas, putting the character in jail for 25 years, maybe giving him a family and having him really at odds with his mob family. So Taylor and I had a quick Zoom call, I pitched him what I wanted to do. He said, "Great, this is your baby. I just have visitation rights. Go do your thing." And that's what I did. And I literally only met Taylor in person one time. Right before we
Wow.
started filming, I met him and we had a dinner together. And I went off to Kansas City, to Tulsa, and he went back to Texas, and we did our things, and here we are.
Well, I think it's really great too because obviously it's present day. It's different from, like 1887, for instance, or even Yellowstone or a different location. But it does feel like there is some thing behind it that seems to connect it with those shows, which I really liked. We have an audience question from Joel Davison in Virginia, and he wants to know, what is the lesson behind the story you want viewers to understand?
I think the lesson, if there is one, is that, people are all the same, no matter where you are or what city you're in. I mean, I think we all want and care about the same things. We all have the same foibles, and I think we have more in common than we have differences. And I think, especially in today's climate, I think it's interesting to point that out to people. I even, again, like as a New Yorker going to Oklahoma, I thought, if you believe everything you see on the news and in newspapers, you think you're going to be chased out of town with pitchforks because you're from New York. And it was not at all. I mean, people could not have been nicer, could not have been more welcoming and lovely. And again, we all presumably, love our kids and trying to get through the day and all want the same things. And a guy like Dwight is no different, aside from the fact that he's a gangster, of course. We have a lot more in common than we think. And I think that's to having these two worlds collide kind of shows that.
Right, and I'm not trying to spoil everything, but there's a great scene where he's showing that they have the same boots in the bar. The Italian boots in first. Yeah.
Which is a perfect example. You go, oh, we more in common than we thought.
Right. So I really liked that comparison a lot. I'm curious too. You just kind of said obviously he's different from us because he's a gangster. He's clearly the protagonist of this. He is the Tulsa King. All that kind of. How do you feel about what is your relationship to this character? If he's a good or a bad guy?
Well, I think, I don't think anybody is any one thing. We all have a lot of different colors, and even with a gangster, if you paint them in their full capacity, you're going to find moments where you relate to them. Even though, of course, I've never been a mobster, never broken anybody's kneecaps. I mean, I've thought about it, but I have never done anything like that. But, when you meet a guy like that, you realize, oh, he loves his family and he has opinions about things and he's got the same troubles that you have. And eventually you're going to find moments where, if not empathy, but like relatability, at least you go like, all right, I understand why he's doing what he does or how he feels. And I feel that way too. So, it's very hard to just, depict somebody as like all good or all bad. Even the worst of us have moments of you go, well, you know what? I understand that he cares about his kids, and you'll find moments where you relate. And when that kind of character is portrayed by somebody as naturally charming and likable as Sylvester Stallone, you get on board really quickly. Even if you forgive him for a lot of bad behavior, especially when you realize what he's been through. He's been to jail and he's sacrificed so much, and the mob family that he thought had his back actually don't really care about him that much. And he misses his daughter, and he's trying to rectify his sins of the past. He's trying to be a better person, and it's a lot easier to get behind somebody like that than it is just a one-note thug.
Yeah, and as you kind of just alluded to, Stallone is he brings a lot of humanity to a role, even though he's just this giant, intimidating, somehow 75-year-old, which we even reference in the show. I can't believe he's 75. Again, reference that he doesn't look it.
I think he's more surprised about being 75 than anybody because I don't think he feels it, and he certainly doesn't look it, and he certainly doesn't present like it. I was sitting with somebody the other day saying he could beat the both of us up with one hand. He's 75 years old, like easily. I mean, he looks like he's an in shape 40-year-old, and it's astounding to see it.
Yeah, I'm ready for Rocky 7 at this point. But yeah, I mean, you even have that in the show too, where he basically knocks someone out with one punch, and I was like, yeah, that's totally believable.
No problem believing that.
Right. So part of the sort of, I don't know, history of Stallone here is that he's mostly well known for playing Rocky Balboa. He's kind of the ultimate underdog in those movies. Even in the last few ones, he's always kind of sort of put up as the underdog in those films. Do you consider Dwight to be an underdog in Tulsa King?
Well, I don't think he was when he started out, when he went to jail. You know, he was a very formidable mob captain and he went to jail and he did the right thing. But when he gets out, circumstances being what they are, make him an underdog. You know, he gets out thinking he's going to get rewarded for his time in jail and the fact that he adhered to that code of omerta and he's going to now go back on top. And right away you realize, oh no, it's actually the opposite. You're actually being banished to somewhere you've never been before. In effect, you're being put back in jail. You're in a place where you don't know anybody, and you've got very limited conflict resolution skills and very limited amount of time left in your life to sort of make something of the choices you made, and you're estranged from your family, your actual family, and your daughter. So he right out of the gate gets set up to be an underdog, and you're rooting for the guy because he has gotten screwed over, and you really want to see him succeed, even though he's he doesn't always do the right thing. I mean, but he is trying to be a better person, and I think that's at least an easier way to get on board with him.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier you were given the show basically with Stallone already attached. So what was it like writing it to an actor that you already are probably quite well aware of at this point? That what was it like writing the script to him?
Well, that made it much easier for me. The idea that I knew it was going to be Sly Stallone and I had his voice in my head was made it easier. But also the idea that I knew a little more about him. I knew how smart he is in real life, how well read, how worldly, how funny, sarcastic. So that's who this character was. So he himself said, when he read my version of the pilot, said this fits me like a tailor-made suit. This is me, aside from the gangster stuff, this is who I am. I am this 75-year-old man who has read a lot of books and has a lot of opinions and still trying to figure out the world and, trying to, make up for mistakes I've made in the past. So this is really me. And that was the best compliment I could get. And then we took it from there and collaborated moving forward with the character. And, of course, as I said, you don't just get a great actor with Sly Stallone. You get a writer, a director, a producer, an editor, a guy who's been doing this at the highest level for decades, who's now your partner creatively. And it was just such a gift to be able to go to work every day and bat ideas around with him. And what you see is on screen.
Yeah, and what a segue, because I wanted to ask you, he's been doing film for I think at least 6 decades, and this is his first TV role in that time. What was that transition like for him, for you watching him? Do you think that how does that come off on screen? Is there anything that he's bringing from the film world to TV?
Well, he certainly brings that incredible magnetism. I mean, you watch him, on a monitor and you go, oh yeah, there's a reason this guy's an international superstar. You can't take your eyes off him. He dominates every scene he comes into, and immediately he's just magnetic. I think he has said, it was challenging. We were out in the middle of Oklahoma for 5.5 months it was over 100 degrees every day, and it was like 106 degrees 80% of the time. And, much like the song from the show Oklahoma, where they say the wind comes whipping down the plain, I can tell you it really does. And it's hot, and it's long days,
Me too.
It was challenging, I mean, it's a lot, but, for Sly, it's like, this is a guy who, he's in almost every scene, and he's working long hours, but he is always prepared, ready to go, happy to be there. But it's a marathon, and I think he understood that, and obviously the guy who's done this many, many times. But he said it was like shooting a bunch of movies back to back, straight through. So by the end, we all needed a break, and we got it, thank God, and hopefully we'll get back there and do it again.
Hopefully, like the musical too, you got to see some of those beautiful mornings as well
I
in
did.
Oklahoma.
I did. I wasn't prepared for the sunset. Somebody, when I first got there, said, "Where do you see an Oklahoma sunset?" And I thought, "You've seen one sunset. You've seen them all." You go, "Actually, no. It's absolutely stunning. The colors, and actually, at the end of our second episode, you get to see a little bit of that sunset. Sly is standing at this place called the Center of the Universe, right around dusk, and you get to see that incredible sky. It's really beautiful."
It's perfect. Well, not to take away from Oklahoma, but kind of back to New York. You're known for work on The Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire. What continues to intrigue you about these mobsters, and what sets Tulsa King apart from your past work?
I'm always intrigued with people who live outside the lines of the law. They're just more interesting. Not to say they're good or bad, but they're just. I always wonder, like, how do you get up in the morning and do this and behave this way and continue your life? So that's always something I'm interested in exploring. The difference here, again, is the stroke of genius on Taylor's part of taking two beloved, tried and true genres of cinema, the gangster film and the Western, and mashing them up. That to me was the thing that was like, oh, this is a really interesting way in. So I can take that New York guy and drop him into a circumstance that you've never really seen before, and then just let people interact with each other. And that was, for me, the big difference and what made it so much fun to write.
Yeah, and it's cool. I can't think of a comparison. Maybe there isn't, but the way he sort of starts to build a crew is really fun. Sort of taking all these different characters that you've probably never seen together in any
Right.
context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of guys are very intuitive. They're like they are just a masters of human nature, and they size people up really quickly. And it's pretty interesting. You know, I've met a lot of mob guys over the years, and they just have a handle on people that a lot of us don't have. They just can sort of smell who's got a little larceny in their soul and who might be a kindred spirit. And I think Dwight is one of those guys.
I love it. So you've also written, speaking of real people you've met, biographical films, everywhere from 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying to The Wolf of Wall Street. How does the writing process differ when you're working on those versus The Tulsa King?
Well, when you're starting with a real person and a real story, you know, you've got a lot of material already there. You know, in some ways it can be a hindrance, though. You know, you try to stay true to the actual story and the actual circumstances, and sometimes that doesn't comport with what you want to do. So when you're writing a fictional character, you sort of treat them as if they're real people and they really exist. Yet you can kind of go to places that you're not handcuffed to by the actual circumstance of their reality. So this was fun. I just made believe Dwight was a real guy and just let him be who he would be and act how he would act. So it was great.
So, you know, Dwight is obviously kind of maintains his profession, even though he tells people otherwise when he's in Tulsa. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But you at one point were a lawyer. So what inspired that change from lawyer to screenwriter, I think several years ago now?
Well, I was the worst lawyer ever, which helped.
That's a good reason.
I became a lawyer for all the wrong. I did everything in my power not to be a writer, because being a writer in Hollywood, growing up in Brooklyn, just sounded like the goofiest possible thing I could say. I wouldn't even say it out loud. I was embarrassed to admit that I wanted to move to Hollywood and be a writer. My friends would have thrown me in the creek. So I did everything I could to not do that. I wanted to be successful, and you know, law school seemed like a good idea, and I did it and didn't like it and didn't like being a lawyer, and I think that showed in my, you know, poor performance. And I finally got to a crisis point in my mid to late 20s where I just finally said, all right, what is it you actually want to do when you wake up in the morning? And my deep dark secret was I wanted to move to Hollywood and be a sitcom writer. Which is where I started. And once I was able to say that out loud, everything changed. I mean, I think my friends and family thought I lost my mind. I had never been west of Chicago. I'd never written a script before. But I knew in my heart this was my destiny and my calling. And I did the legal profession a favor and got on a plane and never looked back.
You did us a favor too, because now we have Tulsa King and all the other stuff. But I have to ask, what was that first sitcom? What was the first sitcom you were staffed on?
The first sitcom I ever wrote on was a show called Sister Sister with Tia Paramount.
Of course.
Of course. If you look at me, yeah, of course. Obviously, the guy to write that. So I did that. Then I was on a show called The PJs with Eddie Murphy. It was a Foamation animated series where he played a superintendent of a housing project. But I bounced back and forth between dark comedies and drama with comedies and sitcom work.
Well, you know, I said, of course, not because, of course, you know, tongue in cheek, whatever. Of course, because I know Sister Sister. In my house, my wife and I, that's one of our like sort of comfort shows from the 90s. Just
more props from kids of friends. Like, you know, they don't care that I wrote on The Sopranos. When they found out I wrote on Sister Sister, I go, now I'm cool. Now I'm suddenly cool. And Xena Warrior. So I get a lot of love for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you're kind of cool for all the very eclectic combination of these different shows. So looking back on all these shows, but I guess more specifically ones like The Sopranos, who has been your favorite gangster to write?
Uncle Junior, probably. You know, just, you know, such an interesting, you know, first of all, you know, the fact that he was older allowed me to put words in his mouth that you couldn't get from the other younger characters. So, you know, old expressions, old idioms, just things that, you know, looking at the world through the lens of a 75-year-old man in the year 2000. It was really fun. And also he was just so devious and selfish and petty and funny. Just it was such a joy to write for him. And then to hear Dominic Chianese say those lines just always made me laugh. So, I mean, I loved writing for all of them, but he was probably my favorite one.
Okay, and I'm really getting into the weeds here, but this is a question I actually want the answer to. Besides Sylvester Stallone, what character intrigued you the most that you brought to the table with Tulsa King?
It's a good question. I think Max Casella's character, Armand. You get to meet him as the series progresses, but he's a guy you see in the pilot who's in Tulsa and is kind of acting a little squirrely. But as you get to know this character, he's a guy who's sort of on the run from his true self and on the run from his life, and he slowly, kind of accepts who he is as the course of the series goes on. I can't give a lot much more than that, but for fear of spoiling anything. But it was an interesting psychological study for a character.
Yeah, I think you do a good job too of, I mean, obviously, but of populating the world around. When they go to the bar, and at first you kind of just see this bartender, but it turns out we're gonna see a lot more of him, at least in the first episodes I saw, and his father. When you're doing this world building, is that the beginning part of the process? Does that come naturally, or is that something when do you start incorporating these characters as you're sort of sketching out the show?
Well, it comes, organically through the writing. He starts encountering people, and you try to create characters who are you haven't seen before, who are feel like real people, and then just sort of let them behave with each other. But then you start thinking about, all right, who is this person? What is his backstory? For example, Garrett Hedlund's character is a great example. In many ways, he's the the Tulsa version of Dwight. He's a guy who's been to jail. He's trying to, make amends for the sins of his own past. He's sort of trying to be a better person. He takes care of his elderly father, who he brings to work with him because he needs to babysit him and he can't leave him home alone. So, there's a decent streak in this guy, much like Dwight. They couldn't be more opposite. Garrett's character is a former bull rider, rides horses. The closest Stallone's character's ever gotten to a horse is Belmont Racetrack. So they're very different people, and yet in some ways they're very same. They're kindred spirits, and that partnership continues throughout the series. So it's kind of fun, and you sort of do that with every character. He's like, who is this guy? Where are they coming from? How they end up there? What do they think of Dwight? And before you know it, this is the great gift of doing a series. You've got hours and hours in which to explore these characters and create these worlds and universes and backstories. And by the time you end it, you go, oh my God, we created a whole universe of people. None of them are real, but who all inhabit each other's worlds and all know each other, and their lives crisscross in really interesting ways. And it's really, really fun.
They're real to me now, but I also have a very real tweet question from someone, Stanley Cos. He says, Terry, I'm so excited for Tulsa King. Did you use any of your personal experience to influence any part of Tulsa King? Can you tell us any of your famous stories about working in the butcher shop or some of the hijinks from grade school?
Thank you for that question. Well, my personal experience, in Tulsa King was really just, again, I'm this New Yorkie guy, not a mobster, obviously, but, just drop myself into Tulsa and go, okay, what do I think? What do people think about me? So I just sort of took it from there. Working in a mob-owned butcher shop as a kid was sort of my graduate school for what I did later. I also worked in a card game run by a pretty prominent gangster in Brooklyn when I was a teenager. It was very similar to the job Henry Hill had in Goodfellas, where I was the kid who gave out the coffee and the cake. So I know, just by osmosis, I just listened and learned and observed how these guys would talk. The butcher shop was funny. Every once in a while, guys in suits would show up, and they would go into the big walk-in refrigerator to have meetings. And I was told to take a walk, and I'd have to go across the street and sit in a candy store. As I'm saying this, it sounds like a bad movie from the 40s, but I literally have to sit at the counter in the candy store until they came out, and then move on. And of course, I just learned how to keep my mouth shut and mind my own business at a very early age.
I love it, and I'm glad that you didn't end up, quite like Henry Hill, if at all,
Yeah,
like Henry Hill. And I'm grateful that we got Tulsa King out of that eventually.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we are out of time, so we will have to leave it right there. Terrence Winter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Great talking to you.
You too. And thanks to all of you for watching. To check out what interviews we have coming up, please head to WashingtonPostLive.com to register and find out more information about our upcoming programs. I'm Dave Jorgensen, and thank you for joining Washington Post Live.